Recorded at the studios of Chicago Public Media, WBEZ, this is Stages to Success. The drive to excel is universal, as is the pride in a job well done. Whether you're staring down a decision maker for a multi-million-dollar contract, a television camera or microphone, a negotiating adversary, or an irate conductor, the pressure to perform can be exhilarating and exhausting. Join me and meet great storytellers from music and business. Stages to Success is brought to you by
NICAR, the Northern Illinois Commercial Association of Realtors.
Today's guest is Jonathan Zimmerman, owner and managing broker of Willard Jones Real Estate in Chicago. Jonathan's small company has a unique niche, representing landlords of what are termed Class C office properties in downtown Chicago. In my opinion, Jonathan is the gold standard for ethical landlord-side negotiation. We started off our conversation talking about Jonathan's entry into his career in commercial real estate. I want to get some background on you coming into commercial real estate, because there's definitely no single path in it for the maybe except with those few that come out of Cornell or come out of Marquette's real estate program.
Right.
But where did you go to college, and what was your major?
So I went to Loyola,
Mm-hmm.
and we are hoping to be getting into the NCAA tournament on the side. So I was an economics major.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, could never figure out what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
I started in finance, was bored out of my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Took a couple economics classes, and something just clicked. So I said, hey, I'm going to stick with this, and it probably will never get me a job, but what the heck.
Well, did you like econ in the theoretical sense, Jonathan, or did you like say, you read about Adam Smith and the invisible hand and you liked it historically, or did you like the modeling portion of it, which I saw at the University of Minnesota? It was very calculus-oriented.
I liked the modeling, and I liked how it related to everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to do some studies on, for example, if Chicago were to legalize gambling
Mm-hmm.
and add casinos, how would that impact the Chicago economy? So that was one of my big term papers. I did a study on the impact that sports stadiums have on neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
So it was applying the theories to everyday life that really clicked with me for whatever reason.
So in the grand scheme of things, you like the microeconomics, the application of microeconomics better than the macro.
Right.
Large scale. That's interesting, because I thought I might be an econ major when I started in college, because I loved the basically AP coursework I'd done on it in high school. But the requirements for calculus put me right out of the box, because I never even took that in high school. So that was an easy choice to say that syllabus and I are not going to be really good friends.
In my very first test in my first economics class, I got a D, which was the lowest grade I've had ever received in my
Sure.
entire life. And
Yeah, you don't seem like a D guy.
I was devastated. So I went to the teacher, and I'm just like, I'm so sorry, I don't know what happened. And he said, well, how did you study for the test? And I said, well, I was just trying to memorize things like I always do. And he looked at me right in the eyes and he said, that is the surefire way to fail out of economics. You need to understand concepts.
Uh-huh.
So from this point forward, I want you to start understanding and stop memorizing.
Uh-huh.
And from that point forward, I got A's on everything.
Yeah, sounds like a great teacher. So when you came out of college with this econ degree, was there a time at which you thought, okay, I'm going to get a master's and become an economics teacher at a college? Or did you say, okay, now how does this apply into the job world now that I have this?
So I, by some miracle, finished first in my class in economics,
Mm-hmm.
and I was accepted into University of Chicago
Mm-hmm.
for graduate studies. And I was just burned out of
Mm-hmm.
school. I went at it really hard, just nonstop studying, and I was just done. And I could not imagine another year or two of school. So I told the head of the economics department I wasn't going to move forward and do any future studies, at least for the time being. And he just got furious at me. But I'm like, I can't do it. So I had an internship at Smith Barney.
Interesting.
And it was more of a marketing job.
Yep.
And the person I was working for left, and the brokers who were employing me at the time asked if I wanted to take over her job. And this couldn't have been at a better time. It was literally a week before my graduation. I didn't have a job yet. And I liked working there. I liked the people. I liked the hours. It was fun working downtown. So I jumped at it. Like, absolutely. And I stuck with it for about 6 months and was just bored out of my mind. It was basically the exact same job I was doing as an intern, paid a little better, but had way more grief, way more responsibility.
Funny how that paycheck does that, isn't it?
Right. So I kept in touch with the person I replaced, and she went over to Merrill Lynch and tried to get me a job there.
Yep.
And it just seemed like more of the same. So we were having lunch one day, and he said, my boyfriend has a small commercial real estate company, and he's got 2 people. He's busy, so busy, can't keep up with everything, and he needs someone. You ought to go talk to him. So I talked to him. He told me how amazing the business was and how I'd make hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. And
So he was a liar.
Exactly. I believe me, I could tell you.
And he's in commercial real estate, so he was perfectly
Go
placed.
figure. So I'm like, I'm right out of college. I'm still living at home. It's a commission job. If I'm ever going to try something like this, now is the time. So I told myself I'd try it for a year. I started on President's Day 1996
Yes.
with Norwood O'Hare Realty Group, which was the worst named company ever because they did no business in Norwood Park or O'Hare.
Oh, interesting.
It was all downtown.
All right.
So I said I'd give it a year, and let's see how it goes.
And he gave you no financial stability in terms of a salary at all. It's 100% commission.
He gave me $1,000 a month draw.
Oh, but it was a draw.
It was a draw.
A recourse
so I had
draw.
to pay it back.
Okay.
He hired me thinking that he was going to be getting the leasing from Steve Fifield on the Civic Opera building. They basically had a handshake agreement. So this was in 96. The market was in shambles. The Civic Opera building was half full.
Yep.
So he said, okay, I'm going to hire you. He was doing 150 North Wacker at the time. Took it from 60 to 95% occupancy in about 9 months.
Well, very good for him.
Doing $14 gross deals.
Okay. Well, that'll do it.
Yes. So I walk into the Civic Opera building and my mouth drops open. I'm like, wow, I'm going to be working on this thing at 22 years old. Amazing.
Yeah, and to back up for the people listening, because you and I speak in code, a $14 gross deal means $14 per square foot per year, gross, including the operating expenses of the building and the taxes. And currently in our market, we're at least double that.
At least.
The 150 North Wacker building is probably closing on triple.
They're trying to get 42 a foot these days.
Yeah, right. So
it's basically $14 a foot will get you a very beautiful storage space in the basement.
Exactly. Okay, so there you are. You walk into the Civic Opera building, and that for people out of town is where the Chicago Lyric Opera has their performance facility on one side that has an interior dome. And the remaining is a Graham Probston white building, I believe, that is classic, huge lobbies, beautiful views over the river, over the Chicago River, and very inefficient. That's what I remember. You only really had about 75% of the space to use that you leased. So there you are. You're 22. You think you're in charge of this account. Were you actually in charge of this account?
So what happened was a couple weeks went by, and like, Sean, what's going on? Sean was the person I was working for, Sean Sullivan, and he said, I don't know. Let me get Fifield on the phone. So he calls him up and he says, Sean, I got to tell you, my leasing guys, Frank Kamen Schwarzschild, they're starting to get some stuff going here all of a sudden, and I feel funny cutting the cord with them right now when they finally have some momentum. So, I'm still probably going to do this. Let's just give it a little more time. And long story short, they went on a leasing spree of the ages. They did a deal with a large law firm that took like 2 full floors, and so much for the Civic Opera building. So in the meantime, Sean had been offered a chance to take over a quote-unquote dumpy old building in the Central Loop, 100 West Monroe.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, well, I could throw you in there. You'll learn real estate, and, let's see what happens. So I'm like, fine, I've already committed to you. What else am I going to do at this point?
Right.
So my first day there, the building manager, who was very old school, very buttoned up, hated brokers, he wanted to do the leasing himself.
Mm-hmm.
So he did his part to drive broker after broker out of the building.
Mm-hmm.
So Sean cut a deal for me to office in the building.
Mm-hmm.
So he threw me on a full floor that had been vacant for 7 years. About half of the floor was demolished, except for this corner office on the corner of Clark and Monroe
Okay.
that had the most beautiful hand-carved paneling that dated back to 1927.
Okay. So you're in your little Clarence Darrow office there.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I walk in, and there's this desk with 3 broken drawers. There's this old couch with a torn cushion in the middle.
I'm loving this. Great. It's a great view I'm getting of this office here.
And the building engineer is on his hands and knees, stapling carpet to the floor.
Was there a bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling?
That was
by
the only
chance?
thing missing.
Oh my gosh! You should have added that.
There's shutters on the windows. I mean, it was everything. And
Wow.
He looks at me and he just smiles. He says, "Good luck. You're going to need it." So here I am in this office all by myself. Sean did not ever really take the time to train me. So he handed me a phone book. He gave me a phone and said, "Go at it."
Dialing for dollars.
Dialing for dollars.
You bet.
So
I've been there.
he was an avid canvasser. He'd go door to door knocking on tenants. And back in 1996, there were no security concerns. You could just come and go from these buildings as
Sure.
you please. You didn't have to sign in, show IDs. So I figure, well, good place to start would be 79 West Monroe, right across the street. A lot of small tenants. We have 40% of the building empty. Let's go. So I start going door to door, going up and down the stairs, and then suddenly I get horse-collared from behind on the 3rd floor, and it's the building manager.
Sure, he doesn't want you stealing his sheep.
So he started lecturing me, telling me how I'm an embarrassment. I'm never going to succeed in this industry. I should never set foot in this building again. He's going to have me arrested. So I go back to Sean, and I'm practically in tears.
Sure.
I'm like, "Sean, I think I made a mistake here." And he just starts laughing. He said,
Yeah.
"You're officially part of the business now. You got thrown out of a building." So here we go. So I basically spend my time cold calling from a reverse telephone directory that listed every building by address instead of name. Did a lot of canvassing and started to get a few things done, but I was struggling at the time. So Sean was in an office at 150 North Wacker. I was by myself, and I told him, I said, "You got to get me in with you and start teaching me some things, or this just isn't going to work out."
Right.
And Sean had a lot of success. He had some things going on in his life and made a lot of money and just didn't really want to work anymore. So he was officing with the Shidler Group, who was one of his biggest clients. They owned 150 North Wacker at the time. And the staff there, nicest people ever, and they just took total pity on me and basically made me one of theirs. So I got to office with them. They would teach me things. I'd get in on all their lunches and after work events.
And so was the Shidler Group a building owner and
Yes.
real estate company?
So they were based out of Honolulu. They owned 150 North Wacker at the time. Were foreclosed on about 3 months after I moved in with them. They had some suburban buildings. And they actually were what First Industrial was born out of, who is one of the biggest industrial REITs in the country right
My
now.
son works for them now.
There you go.
Yeah.
So it was Mike Brennan and Mike Tomaz.
Oh, okay.
And I got to work with Mike Tomaz's wife, and who's a wonderful person, Marilyn. And so I learned just some lessons from the people in that office that have stuck with me to this day. I still stay in touch with some of these people. So finally, because of that experience, I was able to start to make a name for myself. We were starting to get some things going at 100 West Monroe, and the owner there had another building on Michigan Avenue that he got us involved with, and I had picked up a couple small buildings myself at the time. So,
And at this time, are you still with? Is your business card still saying Norwood O'Hare?
Norwood O'Hare. I was a 23-year-old vice president, which was hilarious.
Vice president, the most deadly title in the world.
These
okay,
titles mean a lot.
Yeah.
So after about 2 years, I had it. It just wasn't working. The arrangement with Sean just wasn't working. I won't go into detail on that one, but the owner of 100 West Monroe, Tom Horwich, who's one of the greatest people I've ever met, he and Howard Weinstein purchased Rubloff, and they had a non-compete on the commercial side. Basically, when they bought it, Rubloff was a monster.
Yes, and actually two of our former guests, Vern Schultz and Goldie Wolf Miller, were there, as well as Gail Sturm, my colleague from Pro10, and a myriad of others. You're right. It's a monster and a national player.
And what happened was in 1996, they sold the commercial division to Cole, which is now CBRE, which is arguably the biggest company in the world. And Howard and Tom kept the residential division, and then they sold the development wing to a couple of guys who were based out of Rockford. So Tom said, look, I know you're doing all the work here. I like the work you do. Our non-compete on the commercial side has expired, so we can start doing commercial real estate again. So why don't you keep working on my two buildings, use the Rubloff name. I'll give you an office at 100 West Monroe. He threw me in the office of the building.
You weren't back in that light bulb office.
No, this was a real office,
okay.
But it had no windows. Well, I take that back. There was a window on the outside wall, so I was like being in a fishbowl. But I didn't care. I'm like, wow, Rubloff, this is incredible.
Yeah.
So Howard, who has since become my number one mentor in the business, he said, so here's how this is going to work. We're going to leave you alone. We're going to pay all your expenses. You're going to give a certain percentage of any deal you do to the house. You're never going to embarrass the name. You're going to carry on the Rubloff tradition with pride. I'm going to leave you alone, and if you ever need me, I'm a phone call away. And that was pretty much it. So.
And that's when I first met you, I want to say 12, 13 years ago. You were a Rubloff broker.
Right.
New to Chicago. I was new to Chicago, and coming from New York, what I had heard most about Rubloff here in this area was property management, residential, and I wondered what this Rubloff portion of the business was, and you at that time, and I still think of you this way. You're the king of Class C buildings, and Class C. Will tend to be an older building, less amenities, fewer elevators. Frequently, they can be historic buildings that are extremely interesting.
Right.
And when I first met you, John, and I saw the buildings you were listing for the clients that I was working with that had really limited budgets, I kept seeing John Zimmerman's buildings. And so in my mind, I made this connection of you with Newmark Real Estate in New York City. And I thought, well, this guy just must own this sector. But how was it that when you started to have success in those lower rent buildings, what kind of kept you there? And I noticed that when you started your own company, you maintained all those contracts.
Right.
What was the? Did you feel like it was a niche that you could provide and negotiate really nice low rents that kept you separate and from the rest of the big, white collar fancy suit market, where you could do a lot of quicker lease deals. What was it exactly?
I'm not sure I put that much thought into it, but something that always stuck with me was Tom Kenrick, who was the head of the Shidler Group. He said something to me. He said, when I was really just trying to figure out what is my niche in this industry, he said, my advice to you is pick an area and don't spread yourself out. Just pick one specific area and just become an expert at it. Become the best in the industry at what you do. So, so that always stuck with me. So I never had any desire to do work in the suburbs. I didn't really want to get in industrial. I've done a little bit of retail, but primarily I've been an office guy. And with the success that I was lucky enough to have at 100 West Monroe, because once we got that thing, once we started doing deals there, it just never stopped. And I was there for 14 years, and we never dipped below 95% there.
And you had, obviously, you had a cooperative landlord with access to capital for improvements.
Yes. Great owner. Best owner I've ever worked for, Tom Horwich and his family. And along the way, I had picked up a couple of small buildings. Ari Schulman from Special Assets, who's another person who's had a big influence on my career. He owned 2 small buildings on Washington Street, 166 and 180, which I still lease to this day, 20-plus years. And then I picked up a building on Wabash, 5 North Wabash, which was a jeweler's building. Now it's an apartment building. So I saw some opportunities emerging where there just wasn't that much competition for these buildings. Everyone wants to do Class A. Everyone wants to do these trophy buildings on Wacker Drive and with the highest rents, the best views, the best amenities. But there weren't as many people going after these older buildings.
Right.
And, there's a heck of a lot of people in this world who are on budgets. I know I am with my business. And they seem just like they're neglected. They're an afterthought. You read about articles in Cranes or the Tribune about real estate, and it's always written from the perspective of the big tenant, the 50,000 square foot user, the 500-plus person company. But the truth of the matter is I've always felt that the downtown Chicago real estate market has been driven by the small guys. And
yeah, I don't know if you used the same book for your continuing education that I did 2 cycles ago, but there was a statistic in there that shocked me, was that 95% of the leases in the United States were under 5,000 square feet.
I totally believe that.
And you realize that our fixation on the stories in Cranes of the gigantic headquarters lease deal that gets done it's great to be involved in it, but if you're a smaller business like yours or mine, and you can meet the need of that smaller company and replicate it, there's a nice living to be made there.
Right, and being with a small firm, you don't have to split the fees with as many people.
Yep.
So maybe I know some brokers with bigger firms who have done 25, 30,000 square foot deals, but they have to split it with 10 other brokers around the country. I don't. So for me, a 2,000 square foot deal might be the equivalent of a 25,000 square foot deal for someone else.
Right, and the other piece of the puzzle, John. Sit back. You're a landlord broker, and I'm about to give you a compliment. In order to represent those kind of buildings, and do the business with many companies, many tenant brokers, and then also many people that work both sides, landlord and tenant, you need a reputation that is spotless, because so much we could say to condemn another industry, but we have so many used car salesman type commercial real estate people.
Very true.
That don't dot the I's, they don't cross the T's, and they don't keep their word. And what I kept hearing from people in the industry when I was working on smaller real estate projects was, "Oh, John Zimmerman, you can absolutely trust him. And I would hear that even from your competition, like Dan Shannon at 25 Washington. That, and that's what I think. That's the secret. That's what it takes.
You treat people the way you want to be treated, and you have respect, especially when you're dealing with small tenants. This is their livelihood. They've poured everything they have into starting up these businesses.
Yep.
And if who would I be to treat them like they're not important? I mean, if I had a showing this week for 250 square feet.
Yep.
And it's someone who started her business out of the basement of her house, and she's now getting to the point where she's, having to hire 2 people. She's incredibly excited about it. And yeah, I mean, you don't from a profitability standpoint, 250 feet is nothing, but just getting the opportunity to meet someone, learning about how her business is growing, seeing the excitement in her eyes as she's actually looking for an office.
Yep.
That there's something to be said about that. And, in a business where sometimes it could feel like you're really not doing much to advance the world or society, at least for a small while, you can say, oh, I actually helped someone today.
Yeah, I had that conversation with somebody just this week, that the emotional commission, the emotional pay you get when a client tells you, and I've literally had a client tell me this, the savings that you put together for us in this lease enabled us to hire 2 more people because the terms were good and they were better than we expected. And that's 2 people's jobs. That's in their case, it was about a $35,000 a year salary times 2 for people, and that sticks with me more than the particular commission check that came in. I don't even remember what it was.
Right. I mean, I'm very superstitious about commissions, and I hate that part of the job. I mean, we all have to make a living, we all have to pay our bills, but I will go out of my way to not figure that out until I absolutely have to.
Until you bill it.
Yeah, because I want to stay focused on the task, and it's just all about getting the lease done, and treating people fairly. The deals have to make sense for both sides. I represent the landlords, and in most cases I do some tenant rep also. But if the deal doesn't make sense for both sides, forget it. What's the point?
Yeah, and you're really right about the focus. I think I'm more guilty of vetting my projects to see, is this going to pay enough of a commission with the time in, and I would be really bad on your superstition chart because I take a look in advance at everything that's out there.
I think every time I've done that, the deal's fallen apart.
There you go. And then I think that what you say, though, is really true, and it applies to my other career as a symphony musician too, that if you can stay drilled into doing the best job possible, minute by minute, second by second, person by person, that's way better than having the big scale aspirational, I am going to earn this amount this year, or I am going to do X number of deals, or I'm going to do X number of square feet. Meanwhile, you forgot to call back the architect to see what the area calculation was.
Yeah, it's it's funny to say, but you just cannot focus on that, or I don't think you're going to be an effective broker in the industry. I know plenty of people who all they care about are the commissions. I've had one broker tell me, I don't give a damn about my clients. It's all about me and what I'm making.
Yep.
And he tries to get 10-year deals on every single deal he does.
Yeah.
And I just can't do things that way.
Well, and he's also not going to get hired again. That's the main thing. I remember, back to our small client discussion, I remember working on a pretty small lease. I think it was around 3,000 square feet in a big building, and going in to really argue out the legal terms that are just fair. They're fair in the lease. And then I was told by the person on the other side, you can't fight for these points because this represents like 1.5% of the building's square feet. You're just not being realistic. And all I had to tell him was, I can just take this somewhere else to a smaller building and get it done. But if you want to blow it off, that's fine. But I can't, because this, as you mentioned, is their whole business. They've poured everything into it. And they will come back to me when things go better. And that I was very fortunate to have that happen once in particular, where we went to the mats for a 9,000 square foot flex tenant. It was very cheap. Then it became 14,000 of office, and then it became 41,000 square feet of office.
You just never know.
Right. And I should never have gotten the 41,000 square feet of office. Really, I wasn't big enough to deserve it. But the comment was, sure, we have national representation, but you fought for us on X, Y, and Z and on this and that project. And it will pay. It doesn't always pay back, but it does when you focus the right way.
If you treat everyone the same way, you never know that person may have a next door neighbor who needs 20,000 feet, and if you did a good job on one lease, you'll do a good job on the other lease.
I need to move to a different neighborhood.
Yeah.
Welcome to Stages to Success, highlighting individuals who have helped shape our industry in the Chicago area. My name is Chris Schramko, president of the Northern Illinois Commercial Association of Realtors. On behalf of our association, we are proud to sponsor this podcast series. NICAR provides valuable tools, resources, education, and networking to commercial real estate practitioners throughout the state of Illinois. To learn more about NICAR and the many benefits we offer our members, please visit our website, nicar.com. Thank you.
Stages to Success can be found on TuneIn Radio, Google Play, iTunes, or our RSS feed. The link can be found at www.stagestosuccesspodcast.com. Try telling your Amazon Echo, Alexa, to play it by commanding, Alexa, play Stages to Success podcast. You're listening to an interview with Jonathan Zimmerman, owner and managing broker of Willard Jones Real Estate in Chicago.
It's not my neighbor.
The transition then from Rubloff, you were there for quite a long time, and then you started this company, and that's when I took note of something else to your personality. You didn't you weren't an egomaniac like me and call it John Hunter Services. You called it Willard Jones Real Estate, and I remember when your first news flash came out, and I thought, okay, well, he's keeping all his listings. He's obviously very confident about starting his own shop and going out with this name. And I remember I was just about to write you an email to say, shoot, Willard Jones, that can't be your mother's maiden name. So, and then you had that newsletter that told the story. So I thought it was fascinating. Retell that story of Willard Jones and how it caught your eye.
So what happened was, this was during the Great Recession. Rubloff on the residential side was struggling like so many firms were, and I get a call one day from Howard Weinstein, and he says, "I hope you're sitting down." And, good words never follow after you hear that comment. And he said, "We just reached an agreement to sell the company to Prudential." And all along, we had been talking over the years about trying to spin the Rubloff commercial office off into a separate entity.
Mm-hmm.
Never happened. So I met with the new owners of Prudential, and it became apparent early that they had no interest in growing the commercial side of things. So I had to make a decision. I would have stayed with Rubloff forever if I could have, but it was time to do something else. So I came very close to joining two other companies. I was really on the verge of joining one firm. Like, I was minutes away of calling and accepting a position to start up an office division for a retail firm, and something inside of me said, you gotta do this yourself. All of my clients were going to stick with me.
Meaning the buildings that you were
All the
listing.
buildings, yeah. And so that was a good launching pad. The key guy who was working with me at Rubloff, who did all my marketing and IT work and was a broker as well, he was completely by my side the whole way. And so I said, okay, I'm going to do this. Now I need to think of a name for the firm. And I struggled with this for a long, long time. And in my office at 100 West Monroe, which was previously a conference room, I had this picture on the wall. And there's a service area in the building that has been known as the Cow Path over the years. And true story that when the building was constructed, the original owner of the land site, a person by the name of Willard Jones, was able to get an easement from the city to allow his cows to continue to basically follow a path to the river so they could do their thing. So, for all these years, I had this story on my wall with the name Willard Jones on it. And just one day I was just staring in the space, and I looked at it and it just hit me.
And this guy worked out an easement with the city of Chicago.
Yeah.
That's heroic right there.
So this was in the 1830s.
Yeah.
And he owned a plot of land that basically extended from Clark and Monroe over to Clark and Madison, basically. So like a square block. So I'm like, wait,
Guy would be a billionaire today, a
who
multi-billionaire.
knows what happened, how much he made. So I'm like, wait a minute. Willard Jones, he owned this plot of land, and I'm leasing 4 buildings on this plot of land: 100 West Monroe, 29 South LaSalle, 39 South LaSalle, and 123 West Madison.
Oh, I didn't get the connection of your own listings.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm like, this is it. So I immediately start doing some research on the name and just want to make sure there's no legal issues. Beyond that, it seemed free and clear. So I got the corporation set up, and away we went.
And what was the what did your family think? What did your friends tell you about this? I associate with that rat from the 1970s movies. But what did your friends say about this name you picked out of history instead of gargantuan real estate or?
Well, they all said, "Why aren't you using your name?"
Right.
And I said, "Because I don't want to be in the spotlight like that. It's just not my nature. I like to work behind the scenes. I don't do this for attention."
Right.
And I've always, Chicago is a city of stories. I mean, if you think of Mrs. O'Leary's cow, for example,
Right.
And the St. Valentine's Day massacre, it's just story after story, and I just feel like it fit in.
And that is like the perfect stepping point to my next question, because you put out a newsletter. Yeah, most of them I don't accept. I just block. But the Friday newsletter from John Zimmerman that started, Jonathan Zimmerman, that started coming in around the time you started Willard Jones, I said, okay, he's putting out his listings. I could just go on CoStar and look them up, frankly, but he wants to put out a newsletter that collates them all into one email. Fine and dandy. Good job on the pictures, John. I'm thinking to myself, and then I scroll down. And at the bottom of this newsletter would be a blurb, almost like a history blog of real estate. That's what the first, at least the first 10 to 20 of them, that something was embedded at the bottom that was about the history of real estate. Why? Were you just like in econ? Were you sort of fascinated with the background of weird little tales? Are you a history buff? You love to read about it? Why? What was the background?
I used to love to read. I can't seem to find time anymore. Well, first of all, I have to give credit to my star marketing coordinator, Jillian Schwartz, who this weekly wrap-up was her idea, and she's the one that really pulls it together every week. But as part of it, she convinced me to start writing a blog, and at the same time, one of my clients, Intelligent Office, asked me to start writing for their local website as well. So
okay.
I'm like, okay, well, 2 people are asking me to do this. I better do it. But to me, my favorite part of any building is the backstory. I just, when I do showings and presentations, I always try to start them off by giving a history lesson on the building because I think people really appreciate that.
Yeah.
And, in some cases I've maybe embellished a little bit or drawn some conclusions because, the old saying, you can't put lipstick on a pig, and I have a lot of pigs in my portfolio. But there are some really interesting stories, and I've been lucky over the years to, have buildings like the Pittsfield building, which was one of my worst experiences in real estate is from a leasing perspective,
Yes.
but had an amazing history behind it. And I just think people would really get into it. When I was doing 29 South LaSalle and 39 South LaSalle, I mean, the buildings were in disarray. The owners could not wait to tear them down or redevelop them. And here I am trying to lease space in these lame duck buildings. But they had a great backstory, and people would really get into it and feel like they were somewhere important. It's the fun part of the business, and admittedly my buildings don't really have a whole lot of amenities, and I'd probably be talking about those too if I had them. They are important, but to me it's a great way to set the scene and start a showing if you could really illustrate to people that you're in an interesting place, you're in a significant place, and here's why. Here is the history of the building, who's officed here over the years. Every building has a story to tell. And some are more interesting than others. There are plenty of instances where I have to embellish a little bit, but nothing too crazy.
Right, and I'd mentioned to you that I'd toured the Chicago Temple building that has that stunning chapel in the sky, octagonal room at the top. I send guests from out of town there first. When you go through the property, their property manager will show you Clarence Darrow's office unchanged, basically, since he occupied it. Yeah, and marble that runs right up to the hallways above head level, probably 8 feet high of marble lining the hallways. And it has its own challenges on the financial leasing part of it, but just to see it in person is great. Do you have a favorite? Is there a building that not even of your own that you just go into, you think, this is just great. I love this place.
Yes. I love Monadnock. I know a lot of people don't because it's dark, but to me, that place, the walls just speak to me as I walk through. I think that's my dream retirement job, would be to be the leasing agent over there because it's an amazing story and they don't negotiate. So, there's really nothing to do. The rent is the rent. The lease is the lease. It's great. I dream about that.
Yeah.
I love the Civic Opera building. I love the Rookery. I love the old Santa Fe building on Michigan Avenue. Those are probably my 4 favorites. And they're all historic. As far as new buildings go, I love 77 West Wacker. I think that's the closest modern building that has been able to replicate many classic elements that you just don't see in the new skyscrapers today.
Yeah. Well, from the history of the buildings to the history of the brokers and the people, I had told you about my craziest story, I think, from the showings, and that's hopefully going to germinate some ideas for you, was going to a building on LaSalle Street that was going through a conversion, and we were going through space that had been fairly recently occupied. And the owner of the building took us through, and it had been occupied by a very famous Chicago athlete, where he was keeping a nightclub up there and a little recording studio. And I said, well, why is he gone? And he said, well, you take a look at those windows over there, and they were operable windows on the 18th, 19th floor, something like this, which violates every Chicago fire code, I'm sure. And he said, not too long ago, there was a big party up here, and stuff started flying out the windows from the guests. I said, well, what sort of stuff? I'm thinking Dixie cups, I don't know, a bottle. I was, television sets, a sofa, an armoire, a dresser. And they were big windows. It was certainly physically possible. And I said, what time was this? He goes, I don't know, like 2, 3 in the morning. But I just looked down there and I thought that could have been the news story of all time. And we didn't do a deal at that building. We ended up doing the lease deal at the Monadnock building at the very end of the day. But all they wanted to talk about was that party. They didn't talk about the cash flow analysis, nothing else.
That's the best part.
And that's where I was with you. There in the years that you've been listing buildings, for a youngish guy, you've been at it a couple decades, if not working in 3 decades.
It only feels like 50 or something.
What are the ones that really stick out in your mind? The crazy things that occurred.
So I blogged about this, and I had so many stories left over that I had to do a follow-up the next month. And this isn't even taking into account the stories I really can't tell because it's going to get too many people, including myself, in trouble.
Uh-huh.
Where do I start? I mean, I've seen, I walked in on a property manager and the chief engineer getting it on in the stairwell in the middle of a showing. I was showing 2 contiguous floors and decided to take the stairs instead of the elevator. and both were married at the time and not to each other.
Uh-huh.
Although I believe they're married to each other today.
Okay, well, there you go.
I've had an owner of this same building who would, right in the middle of a meeting, would just get up, walk over to the sink, unzip his fly, and start relieving himself. Would be drinking beer out of a coffee cup just to send messages. I walked in on a retail space I was showing, and it was an old Starbucks, and I heard some noise behind the counter, and I peeked over, and the property manager was there completely nude, wrapped in a towel.
All right.
So that will stick with you.
That's a good whole new meaning to the word showing, really.
Yeah, and she was in her 60s, so, just as an aside. I mean, I've been stuck in the elevator on showings with someone who started hyperventilating.
Uh-huh. Did you actually solve the problem? Get a bag over their mouth? And
I was frozen.
You were frozen.
And then, fortunately, it started moving again, and there were 3 firemen in the lobby with crowbars getting ready to pry the doors open.
Mm-hmm.
I've walked into a building with 2 elevators that were both down, and I had a showing on the 12th floor.
That's nice.
That didn't go well. Where do I even begin? I mean, there's just so many things over the years. I've walked in on a space that was roach infested, another one with a dead mouse right in the middle of the suite.
Mm-hmm. Now, see, you're in control of the asset. Well, you're actually very out of control of the asset in that case. I, as mostly on the tenant side, though not always, but mostly on the tenant side, I've actually gone to an address that didn't exist because we did not check. Well, the buildings, we didn't do a dry run on the buildings. I shouldn't say we. I had not done a dry run on the buildings that the client had supposedly selected from drive-bys. So you got to an address, and that building was no longer there. That was really special.
You live and you learn.
Have you shown space where the landlord never informed the current tenant that it was up for lease?
Absolutely.
And how does John Zimmerman, extraordinary landlord broker, handle that situation?
You basically just let him yell at you and let him get it out of your system, and then do the showing.
And you followed through. You let that new
Absolutely.
prospect go through, and
they thought it was funny. Fortunately,
yes,
they didn't rent the space, but they got a good laugh out of it. I mean, I've walked into suites that I thought were vacant, only to find out that there was magically a tenant inside because the property manager leased the space without telling me.
Okay.
In hopes that he would get to keep the commission for himself.
Uh-huh.
I had a contract which covered me.
Yeah.
I remember a rookie mistake early on. A space became available, and I had someone who was like a perfect fit, needed immediate occupancy.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of doing the smart thing and looking at the space beforehand, I took the word of someone who said, "Oh, it's just like that other suite down the hall that you just rented."
Mm-hmm.
Fine. So we went in there, and it turned out that the previous tenant who just abandoned the space was running a male escort service out of there.
Oh,
And there were VHS porn tapes all over the place, all kinds of sex toys. You name it, it was in there.
wow.
So that taught me a lesson. Always check these spaces out beforehand because you never know what you're going to find.
Yes, I was working on a suburban requirement on a relocation because my client, who was in the second floor, I believe, of the building, was right off the walk-up entrance from the at-level garage. You know how those suburban buildings are set up where the building exists as a platform over a ground-level parking lot.
Sure.
And so, unfortunately, whoever designed the building hadn't put big numbers on the entrance doors to each floor. So, much to my client's dismay, the space immediately above hers was running a prostitution ring out of a quote-unquote massage client.
Yes.
And so she kept getting people coming to her door, mostly male people, at very odd hours, and she kept after hours asking for the obvious. And it was not a pleasant situation for her.
Imagine.
And we ended up moving her out of that building. And I remember taking her out and out of that property to another, and we sort of laughed about it and said, "Boy, what is the chance that would happen to this poor landlord of yours?" And she said, "Yeah, that's not my favorite landlord anyway." And then, lo and behold, in the news 2 months later, the exact same thing was happening at another building owned by the landlord. So it was. We got quite a charge out of that. How about things going missing from the building when a tenant moves out?
We've had doorknobs.
Oh, doorknobs.
Taken, yeah, for whatever reason. Someone once took all the light bulbs out of the light fixtures.
Okay.
What else? What am I missing? Like toilets, supplies from the bathroom. Someone will take like all the paper towels and toilet paper and soap.
And you weren't leasing in Venezuela at this time. No, that was right here. How about animals in the building?
Just the rodents. And
Just
the
the
roaches.
rodents. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a tenant who had a German Shepherd that he would always bring to the office that would bark every time I'd walk on the floor trying to show the space across the hall.
That's great.
And I sadly to say, the space did not rent until the poor dog passed away.
Okay.
Because the property manager was afraid of the dog and the tenant and refused to say anything and said, "You guys realize the space will never rent as long as that dog is there." Like, well, why don't you talk to him?
Yeah.
I said, yeah, I've tried. He won't. I didn't get very far.
Well, here with the prevalence of mixed use and entire floors going residential, I have shown buildings on Wacker where I brought the client in, where you're standing in the lobby where everybody else is, and they were actually looking at purchasing an office condo in this building.
I know the building.
And there we were in the lobby, and in walked this lady with a couple of Airedale dogs, right past her, right to the elevator, and up to her apartment, I'm sure, or her condo in the building. And my client, who was very buttoned up and professional, just looked at me, looked at the representative for the building, said, "This tour is over." And we were out of there. But
it's starting to become more accepted, especially in loft buildings. But I've seen it where I was leasing a loft building in River North, and this woman got into an elevator wearing a white pantsuit, and it was clear she was there for an important meeting with a design firm on the top floor. And then I hear hold the elevator door, hold the elevator door. So someone comes racing in with this giant dog, and it was raining outside.
oh no,
So the dog, second, walks into the elevator, jumps on her, and there's black paw prints all over.
Oh
her
my
white
gosh.
suit. And she lost it. And I'm waiting in the lobby for a showing, watching this whole thing. And it was really uncomfortable.
Was
I
that
learned
your
a few-
client?
It
Please,
wasn't my client,
prospect.
but of course the showing walks in as she's screaming, and they said, "Don't worry." And fortunately, their reaction was, "Don't worry, we don't have dogs. We're not going to add to your problems here."
Oh my gosh.
I learned a few new curse words from her, though. So
Yeah.
have her to thank for that.
Yeah, there you go. I remember doing a walking tour for a retail client where we got caught in a rain that probably should have happened somewhere in Indonesia. I don't think that rainstorm belonged in Chicago. I think it was lost. And we were in between spaces, maybe only a block apart. And I said, "Do you just want to dodge in a doorway here?" And no, she insisted she was going to walk through and meet the next owner. And she was wearing all white. And the conversation will just end there, I think. But and you're dealing. I think the thing with real estate that you focus really well on, John, is that it is always about the people. You can focus on the building, you can focus on the cash flow, you can focus on the math, and I'm a big person on the math on the tenant side. To really please try to take the emotions out of it that you feel towards the building or whatever, but you can't take the people out of the equation. You have to serve them and help them, and make a good. Often it's a good match between the landlord and the client just as much as it is the lease terms.
You need a psychology degree sometimes because you're right. You're so right. The personalities are so important, and buildings today you don't see as many long-term holders as you used to. I mean, my 100 West Monroe owner, his family had the building for 44 years. He had 30 North Michigan for 35 years. I have a client now who has a building that he's owned since 1981. You don't see that anymore. So, at one point in time, I could really use that as a selling point and say, hey, you're renting from someone who is so dedicated to this building and takes such good care of it. If you come here, this is the service you could expect for 5 years. Now, it's like if I sign a 3-year lease with someone, I really wonder, how many owners are you going to have during these 3 years? Because these buildings just change hands so frequently now.
Of the buildings you represent, what tenant that you can think of has been at that address the longest?
Wow. There are tenants I know of who have been around for 30 plus years in some cases, and they never move. They also never throw anything out, and that's probably why they never move, because it would be such a nightmare. But, there's one of the buildings I'm involved with on Washington Street, 166. There's a tenant there who moved in my first month on the building in 1997, and they're still there.
Anybody that predates you that's been in the building generations?
Yeah. Not that particular building, but in some other ones. Yeah, there's some instances where the father had the business and now the son is running it, and they're going on 30, 35 years in the same space or in the same building.
We had a popcorn business in the retail space at the very first development company I worked with, that their leasehold was 75 years. Wow. I still remember that. I'm not sure it went between different people.
Incredible.
Yeah, that's when you know it's really working. It's not an owner user. It's a landlord they trust and a place they like, and there they stay.
It's our job to get people to move, but I fully understand when someone tells me they don't want to move.
You bet.
It's not fun.
Yeah, well, it's stable for them and no money for us. But because you're the kind of guy, because you're the kind of guy who doesn't focus on that cash first, that bodes well for that tenant that's going to stay long term.
I've told plenty of people over the years, I'll just ask them point blank, why are you moving? What do you have to gain from this? And yeah, it may cost me some money, but I'll sleep better at night.
Yeah. well, you're like the broker of that epitomizes the miracle on 34th Street or something, John Zimmerman. I thank you for coming in. I wish nothing but the best for Willard Jones and the talent that you hire and train up just the way you were trained up by good people. So that,
and I am looking for more talent if anyone's interested.
well, there you go.
Maybe a John Hunter would like to.
Well, I think your website's going to get flooded once this
this
podcast gets out. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
You're a stalwart in the business in a sector that is really, really overlooked. Thanks for coming down today.
Thank you, John.
I hope you enjoyed today's interview with Jonathan Zimmerman of Willard Jones Real Estate in Chicago. I'm your host, John Hunter, digital editing and technical assistance from Monty Scott, and recorded at the studios of Chicago Public Media at Navy Pier. Join us again for people and stories from the worlds of the symphony orchestra and commercial real estate for our next episode of Stages to Success. To success. To success. To success. To success. To success. To success.